This will be for the con assignment, correlation, coefficient, intuition. So just some notes before we start. Okay, correlation coefficient. The correlation coefficient R measures the direction and strength of a linear relationship. Calculating R is pretty complex, so we usually rely on technology for the computations. We focus on understanding what R says about a scatter plot. So some facts about R. Let me see here. It always has a value between -1 and 1. Strong positive linear relationships have values of R closer to 1. Strong negative linear relationships have values of R close to -1. Weaker relationships have values of R close to 0. All right, let's look at a few examples. So here, the dots line up on a perfect line. Okay, and you can see it's a positive slope. As one variable increases, the other variable increases. It goes up and to the right. So since it's perfectly correlated right on the line, that means R equals 1. Okay, now that is not the slope. Okay, it just means that it's perfectly correlated on the line, and it's a positive slope. Okay, the number doesn't match the slope, but the plus minus sign does match the slope to an extent in most cases. All right, so here's another graph. The dots are spread out, and if you fit a line to the data, it is positive. It's a positive slope, but it's very weak because this line does not match the dots. It can't because the dots are too spread out. So the R, or correlation coefficient, is going to be positive, but not that close to 1. So here it's 0.5, which is weak positive correlation. All right, moving on. When the dots are just too spread out and you can't fit a line with positive or negative slope, it's just a straight line like that. That is R equals 0 or no correlation. Okay, they could not fit a positive or negative sloping line to these points. So it's just 0. Okay, and then finally, here's one that's negative. But notice the dots are spread out. They're not all on the line. So it's not going to be R equals -1. Okay, it's going to be negative, but not close to -1. And here it says it's -0.5, which is weak negative correlation. All right, and see here is a negative slope. The line is perfectly on the dots. That's going to be -1. All right, again, that is not the slope, although the plus minus sign does match the slope. And it's -1 because the line is on the dots for each case. So it says match the coefficients with the scatter plot shown below. Okay, so here are the numbers. We're going to have to left click, drag it into place. Let's see. So for scatter plot A, it's definitely going to be negative. Okay, but it's spread out quite a bit. So it's not going to be close to 1. But so far, we have A is going to be negative. All right, let me fix that. A is going to be negative, and this is scatter plot B. That's going to be positive. All right, and if we go down to C and D, let's take a look. If you look at C, that is spread out a lot. Okay, hard to even say if that's going to be positive or negative. So for C, we're just going to say it's weak. Okay, which means it's going to be closer to 0 than the other ones, because you can't fit a line to this. And this is part D, graph D right here. I'm thinking it's negative. I'm thinking it's positive, but this is very spread out. All right, let's compare D to B because those are both positive. So D, it's kind of spread out, but on B, it's not quite as bad. So B is a stronger positive because the dots aren't as spread out, but on D, the dots are spread out a lot. All right, so the one that's stronger is closer to 1. All right, so let's do that. Let's check out our answers here. Okay, so B we said was the strongest positive. So the highest positive here is 0.84. I'm going to drag that over to B. All right. And we said C was the weakest. That's the one closest to 0. So we got that right here, negative 0.2. And we said D is positive, but not as strong as B. So this one here is positive. That's going to go to D. And it just messed me up here. Let me see. C is the weak one, closest to 0. And B is the strongest positive. All right, so that should be it. Just remember, as you go to +1 or -1, it is a stronger correlation. Okay, so as you go toward +1, that's a strong positive. If you go to -1, that's a strong negative. And if you're at 0, that means the correlation is weak. All right, so these are all the same. Match the coefficients with the scatter plot shown. Let's check it out here. Okay, I can see that scatter plot A is very spread out. Okay, it's more spread out than B. It's more spread out than C, and it's more spread out than D. So I know A is going to be the one that's closest to 0. Let's take a look. All right, and I think negative 0.42 is the closest to 0 out of these. All right, let's keep going. For part B, clearly we can see B goes down and to the right. So B is going to be a negative. All right, let's see. For part C, that's going to be a positive. And for part D, that's also going to be positive. Now, out of the two positives, which one is stronger, D or C? I'm going to say D because these dots are closer to the line. These dots are more spread out. So for D, that's going to be the stronger one. Okay, so C and D are both going to be positive, but D is going to be the one that's closer to +1. All right, let's check it out. D is going to be closer to +1. So 0.86 is closer to +1 than 0.65. All right. C and D are both positive, but D is the stronger one. So that's closer to 1. All right. And we said B was negative, and we said A was the weakest because it was very spread out. So A is going to be closest to 0. All right, so that should be it right there. All right, last one. So if you look at A, that's positive. If you look at B, hard to even say. B is very weak. All right, moving on. If you look at C, that's definitely negative. And if you look at D, that's also negative, but that's weaker. So B was the weakest because I couldn't even tell if it was positive or negative. All right, so let's check it out. A has to be the greatest positive, all right? So 0.85 for A, that's fine. B is the weak one, so that's closest to 0. Okay, 0.39, that works. C and D are negative, but D is the weaker negative. So D is going to be closer to 0. All right, so I'm going to take the negative 0.71 and put that on D. All right, and C is closest to negative 1. All right, so that's it. Remember, the plus minus sign will match the slope, but these are not slopes, okay? They're just showing you how close the data points or dots are to the line.